Trebje se demonstrira.
Agresija je završena.
Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti Bošnjak.
Gospodin Karadžić više niko možda ostaviti.
Republika Hrvatska proglašuje samostalnom i suverenom državom.
Türkiye'den daha büyüktür. Ufkumuzu 782 bin kilometre kareyle sınırlandıramayız.
Hello, dear listeners. This is the Balkan Chronicles or Balkanske Kroniki speaking to you. My name is Jakubo Horvat, and I am very happy to welcome in our midst my expert on Balkan affairs. His name is Árpád Párducz. Those who haven't heard his episodes in the past, I will let you introduce yourself. You know yourself the best, after all.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Árpád Párducz, and I'm a Budapest-based Hungarian Western Balkans expert. I'm a doctoral student at the Corvinus University of Budapest, specializing in the Western Balkans affairs. I'm working directly on security, foreign policy, and energy policy topics, and everything in between. So before my current posting, I was working at the Migration Research Institute, so I'm quite well reserved in our Western Balkans affairs.
Yes, if you haven't heard his previous episodes, I can very much recommend, even though it's a bit outdated regarding the Kosovo elections, because there was new elections which turned out similarly to the previous one, a bit more success to Albin Kurti's party, and we had an episode on elections in Albania as well, so I can recommend go and listen to those as well. But today we met for a different reason, different topic, which is, I guess, always out there if we think of the Balkans and its organized crime from the Balkans. Well, take it away.
Yes, so thank you. It's a really interesting topic, and most of the times it's quite defines the Western Balkans region, because we can see the question of or the topic of organized crimes in video games, series, in the television or movie films. And when we are talking about the Western Balkans, it have a perfect geographic location because it links the biggest, for example, drug market, weapons market, or biggest market all in all, the European Union or the European states, most of the times with the biggest suppliers of illicit things like drugs or illegal weapons or cars or fuels or fake cigarettes. And usually these come from basically from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, and the Western Balkans have a perfect geographical location to link these 2 or 3 places together. And so the term of organized crime, smuggling, and everything in between have a rich historical background in the Western Balkans. And when we are thinking about the 90s and the Yugoslav wars, we also see different kinds of organized crime activities perpetrated by either the UČK in Kosovo or other rebel instruments, or either from the Yugoslavian National Army or the Serbian groups. And after that, these groups had to have to go somewhere, and most of the times the veterans of this conflict were enrolled upon different criminal gangs. And
if I can just step in and elaborate a bit more, because we had an episode on that in Slovak language. These crime groups, they made themselves very infamous or famous, you can say, in the 1990s and in early 2000s, particularly because they went so far and they assassinated the Prime Minister of Serbia in that time in 2003. Djindjic was assassinated by Zvezdan Jovanovic, who probably didn't act alone, but he was hired by an organized crime syndicate, Zemunski clan, there are many theories. One of them is that he was hired by his superior from Special Forces of Serbia, Ulemek, who was originally part of Serbian paramilitary forces, who fought during the Yugoslav wars. Because you can imagine the situation, there was civil war going on, or we can call it the emerging countries war, the Croat, Serbian war, the civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the conflict between Serbia and Kosovo, and the paramilitaries played a significant part because the Yugoslav army was a multinational army. Very often the ethnicities refused to fight, they could not be relied upon, so very often like hardcore groups made from hooligans, or we can say tough guys, did much of the fighting and were well equipped, well supplied, well informed, had connections to the government. The most famous one is obviously Arkan and his Tigers, the Serb volunteer guard, who made themselves famous via successful military operations, as well as being very cruel and having committed crimes against civilian population, also Serbian one, those males who refused to fight, and against Croats and Bosniaks and etc. And when the fighting finished, these tough guys who held a lot of power, they had a lot of weapons as well, and suddenly they were kind of left in a vacuum, and even the government couldn't touch them or had to find some sort of cooperation. And when Serbia went through turmoil in the early 2000s, there had to be some resolution regarding Milosevic. So these guys, there is a theory they attempted to return Milosevic to power. We don't know if it was on Milosevic's orders or not, maybe they acted alone or not, but they held a lot of power, and when they were finally, we can say, defeated, because Serbia didn't take lightly killing off their prime minister, they launched Operation Sabre, and they basically dealt with the strongest of the gangs, and some of the leaders of the paramilitaries were assassinated themselves, including Arkan, but many of them stayed. There were a lot of weapons from Yugoslav army which were never accounted for. We're not just talking regular firearms, we're also talking anti-tank missiles, etc., which nowadays we can find them in the Ukraine war, we can find them in the Middle East, and very often nobody knows how they got there. So this is just a bit of history, how particularly Serbian organized crime groups were founded. But of course there are much more Albanian groups from Kosovo. They had a different mode of operation. Albania was a separate country. It had its own modus operandi, as they say.
Yeah, and to stay a bit more with Yugoslavia, one of the most important things for the success of organized crime groups from the region is the help of the diasporas in different countries around the world. For example, the groups from the Western Balkan are one of the major powers moving cocaine from South America to Europe, and this is achievable because they had ready-made connections there through diaspora, and even in Brazil, Chile, and Peru, Bolivia, these kinds of countries, and they moved there before the Yugoslav war. So during the Yugoslav times, they're settled in there, and it's the same with the biggest illicit markets, like in France with the Albanians, the Serbs, the Bosniaks in the German-speaking countries like Switzerland, Germany, Austria. So they had already built-in connections to the illicit markets there, and they had the knowledge, they had the language skills, they had the money, they had the knowledge, everything. So this is what the former veterans and everybody, even during the Yugoslav times, the state security services could tap in to arrange some kinds of surveillances, assassinations even, or different kinds of break-ins, burglaries. So it's a really big strength that the criminal groups from the region still use nowadays. And when we are talking about the Yugoslav times, there were still the problems of cigarette smuggling and fuel smuggling for the Yugoslavian National Army, but I would say that these things are moments of the past because they are still happening in some small and well-hidden areas, but the most which is important in the Western Balkans, and I think the weapon smuggling, the drug smuggling, and the smuggling of migrants or smuggling of underage girls who then will partake in prostitution.
Let me object to that a bit, that cigarette smuggling and drug smuggling is a bit of the time of the past, because if I remember, it was not that far away, maybe 2018, when the former president of Montenegro, Milo Đukanović, was accused and never basically left these accusations behind, that his presidency or his party, the socialists, were very well funded by cigarette smuggling groups. And also the current foreign minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Konaković, is supposed to have strong connections to similar groups and also to drug smuggling groups. I mean, maybe these are just rumors, but these top figures from the Balkans could never shake them off.
Yeah, but I think when we are talking about cigarette smuggling is in the big scale operation is a thing from the past, and I thought we are talking about from Bosnia-Herzegovina or Montenegrin perspectives, mostly they are related to the early days of both countries, and I think revenue-wise the drug smuggling is the most well-known or most profitable.
Are there any numbers available, at least suggested?
Yes, according to the United Nations arm responsible for monitoring drug trafficking, in each year like 20 or 21 billion worth of different kinds of drug, cocaine, marijuana, amphetamine, or any different kinds move through the Balkan region. But it's important to say that the Western Balkans, apart from the marijuana smuggling and producing, it's just a transit region, so most of the time they are just get a smaller amount of this, like 1 or 1.5 billion for moving the product through from this region. And it's really interesting because according to different interviews available in news sites with different Interpol or Europol or different kinds of law enforcement agents, they said that, yeah, it's really funny because there is hardly any seizure or drug bust within the region, so in the Western Balkans. So it's either happens before the cargo is reaching the region or when it's tried to left it, so at the gates of the European Union in the Schengen zone. So it's a well-known possibility and a very likely possibility that the different law enforcement agencies are, or different kinds of people in these industries and agencies are working for the organized crimes group for a hefty bribe.
Yes, as you said, nowadays it's mostly about cocaine and marijuana regarding illegal drugs. In past, heroin was the most profitable narcotic. Regarding Slovakia, there is a very famous case of a Kosovar Albanian drug smuggler. His name is Baki Sadiki. He was like a very big personality. He had very influential connections. He met with, at that time, he was chief of the Supreme Court, Stefan Harabin. Now he is a politician. He was even a runner for the president. And in the end, Baki Sadiki ended up in jail. His sentence was always upheld. It was 22 years in high security prison. And he's most known Slovak Balkans figure, which was arrested for a huge drug smuggling operation, even though he always denied of being the head of such an organization. And it's exactly as you said, he was accused of committing this crime in Slovakia. He was present in Kosovo at the time of his arrest, but via the agreement with Kosovar authorities, he was arrested and moved to Slovakia to serve his sentence, which he is still serving even nowadays. Is there such a visible case in Hungary?
It's very interesting because in Hungary there is a different perspective, because we had most of our high-profile cases regarding the organized crime group from the region in the early 2000s, when the veterans of the already mentioned conflicts wanted to earn more money and the Hungarian organized crime figures could offer them that. So most of the times when we are talking about Western Balkans organized crimes group operating in Hungary, they are either mentioned as hitmans, assassins, or mostly operating in the southern part of the country, and they took over the different smuggling operations from the locals. So it's quite interesting. And this second part of the problem is still ongoing because it's like a monthly problem in the Hungarian border, which is also the Schengen border of the European Union for the Schengen zone. And we see that more and more Albanian gun smuggler is caught. So like yearly or monthly, there are busts which is ranging from one confiscated pistol to 20 or 25 assault rifles. So it's quite a big scale operation, and it's really much ongoing, and it's really important and quite sad because most of the times these weapons found their way to different buyers in the underworld of the European Union or different terrorist groups, because when we are looking up to the Charlie Hebdo murders or Charlie Hebdo attack, the perpetrators used Serbian-made zastavas, and the other Paris attacks were committed with munition bought from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And to make things worse, the military lockups of Bosnia and Herzegovina are quite often burglarized, so there are still hand grenades missing and every armor-piercing ammunition missing, assault rifles missing, so it's quite possible they will show up in organized crime hands in Western Europe or in somewhere else in the Middle East or even still inside the Western Balkans in a showdown.
Yes, I remember reading article piece in about 2019 when there was a review of inventory, I think it was Bosnia and Herzegovina, of military arsenal, and they were missing like anti-tank missiles. I mean, that gets ridiculous.
Yes, and
imagine what you can do with that.
Yes, and even without these thefts and missing inventory pieces, according to the latest small arms surveys, there is at least 6 million missing or privately owned but unlicensed handguns and light arms in the Western Balkans region. And it can be linked to habits of weapon keeping of the region and the conflicts, the quasi-civil war in Albania. So there were many times and many occasions when weapons got missing. So most of the times are, according to the latest investigative journalists, they are journal pieces in the Western Balkan gangs charge like 800 euros for a Kalashnikov type of assault rifle, 500 for a pistol, but when these are used, the price can go lower because these are weapons which are going searched after by different security services or police services. So it's really interesting and quite diverse market, and it made quite headways in the Hungarian media because in 2024, 2025 there were some shootings among the different migrant smuggler gangs along the Hungarian-Serbian border, and it came out that these different Western Balkan and non-Western Balkan organized crime groups were armed by Albanian and Kosovar organized crime groups because they had still leftovers from the wars against the Serbians, so they wanted to make use of it.
I'm surprised that you're talking price per piece. I would think that you would talk price per kilogram of arms. There are that many. You talk that it is mostly smuggling of narcotics through the Balkans. Where do they originate from? Is it known?
Yes, most of the times. If we are talking about marijuana, is originating either in the Middle East or in Albania, so it's sourced locally. This was one of the biggest parts or biggest gains of Albanian illicit economy, and maybe the place of Lazarat. It was dubbed by journalists as the marijuana mecca of Europe or the world, and this city entirely sustained itself from marijuana smuggling and marijuana producing, and they had to be besieged by the Albanian army and special police forces, but it was quite hard undertaking because they had purchased anti-surface-to-air missiles, for example, and assault rifles, machine guns, and even when you have the chance to speak or see some conciliations and stories about this by police forces and military officers, they said that there were an old lady in the street, we tried to hush her over to safety, and he brought up a submachine gun and started firing at us, and stories like this. So they had to be besieged twice, and then it's really interesting to how do the Albanian police, with the help of the international community, try to manage the cannabis problem in the country. And when we are talking about the question of opium and other kinds of drugs, it's originally from Afghanistan and from the Middle East, and it's originally distributed by the Albanians because they have really good working relations with the Turkish and Kurd organized crimes groups, who are also heavily have diasporas in different Western European countries. And when we are talking about the question of cocaine, then we are of course speaking about the land of Pablo Escobar, Colombia, countries in Latin America such as Brazil, Peru, Chile. And it's really interesting that most of the times the Western Balkan gangs are hired to move this product because, as I mentioned before, they have the connections with the locals. They seen as seaworthy peoples because of the beaches they have. So they have quite a bit of population who are sailors. So it's also a big plus for them, and they mostly avoid the different infightings with local gangs. And most of the times the American DEA agents said that yes, the Western Balkans gang are a big problem, but they are usually avoiding the American market because the Mexican drug cartels are so much stronger than them. So they are moving to or piloting to different markets like the Western Europeans. For example, the Albanian from 2015 to 2018, the Albanian gangs, according to the British intelligence and British law enforcement like Scotland Yard, completely overtook the, I think, 3 billion worth cocaine trade in the United Kingdom, and they're still going strong, and mostly they are responsible to smuggling migrants and weapons to the United Kingdom as well.
Are we talking about Kosovar Albanians or Albania? Or I would personally think that it's more about the nationality, not statehood, but what do you say?
It's hard to say because most of the times the British, either in the statistics or either in the newspapers, they don't distinguish between Albanians born in Albania and Kosovars born in Kosovo, but most of the times they are signing partnership agreements and information sharing agreements with the Albanian police, so not the Kosovar ones. And this is why I think that the Kosovar Albanians are the smaller side of the problem or smaller portion of the problem, and the Albanians born in Albania is the bigger problem because most of the Albanians are trying to, as well as other migrants, try to enter the country illegally and work then for the shadow or illicit economy for different Albanian criminal gangs who are already there. So it's a really big problem.
I would say that for the sake of the Western Balkans governments, they are cooperating. There is a very good cooperation between the police, between the various security organizations of European Union and Western Balkans countries to try to stop this illegal trade in either narcotics, of course, trade in people, trade arms, etc. But as I would like to quote a fantastic movie, which I enjoy very much, it's Clear and Present Danger from 1990s about U.S. fight against the Latin American narcotic groups. The president is asking that, why are we failing in this fight? I mean, we are investing like billions of dollars to fight these narcotic groups. Where do we go wrong? And his advisor says, well, they have unlimited budget. They are better equipped, they are better staffed because they have unlimited budget from the drug trade. And this is also still the case even nowadays. These are well organized groups with huge profit margins, and very often the police forces are understaffed, underpaid, and it takes a lot of effort and slow effort to fight these things. Even with the help of cross-border cooperation, it's probably a never-ending story.
Yes, it's definitely a never-ending story, and I think there is another aspect which we didn't mention yet, and it's that when we are talking about an organized crime group, we are thinking about the Mexican drug cartels, the mafia, the Cosa Nostra, and maybe the Yakuza if you are watching or the triads if you are watching some Asian films or series. But when we are thinking about these organizations, we see big organizations with different branches responsible for different things. So it's like an octopus that you can cut off one arm, but there is 7 or 8 others. But it's not the same with the Western Balkan organized crimes group, because these are quite small, like 5 or 10 members, or maybe 15, 20 if it's really big organization, but they really can work together amongst themselves and as well as amongst with the different international criminal gangs. So they are quite resourceful, and it's really interesting because when we see the Western Balkans, it's a region which is where ethnicity is quite high on the agenda, quite high on the self-definition of peoples from the region. And when we are talking about organized crime and the money which comes with it can trump it. So for them, they don't think about that. I don't work with you because you're Albanian, you are Kosovar, you are Serbian. So there is nothing about these kinds of ethnic segregation or rejection. So they are quite adept working together, working with small groups. So that much harder to surveillance these kind of groups, to apprehend these kinds of groups, because they are much more fast-moving than a cartel with established territorial holdings or a mafia group which is responsible for a different part of a city. So it's so much more harder.
Yes, at least on a positive note, at least from my perspective, we are not talking anymore about the situation as it was during the early 2000s when they were so strong and so bold as they went on to assassinate the Prime Minister of Serbia. As you said, these groups are nowadays much smaller, operate independently of each other, and there are not as many like open assassinations or shootings of disco clubs, etc. It's more about money than like power projection.
Yes, I would say you are partly right, because gang wars still happen. Sometimes shooting up discos still happen, but in a much smaller scale. And even when we are talking about gang wars, like for example in what is happening in Montenegro currently between rival factions of the heroin trade, we can see that these assassinations, not like what you see in The Wire or any kind of American drama maybe, but they are targeted assassinations every time one of the members of the different gang is targeted. So not a big explosion with a lot of casualties by bystanders. So it's much more smaller scale now, thankfully or luckily.
I can very much recommend everyone watch The Wire. It's a fantastic show. I absolutely love it.
Yes, I second that.
And yes, in the show they also have the Greeks as a very important importer of narcotics. It goes along with what you said, that very often it's the nationality which is strong at the ports, which have a tradition of dealing with the naval trade. It's the same with Montenegro. These big port cities are the hub of narcotics trade. It is for granted probably.
Yes, definitely. I think it will be a problem which will be ongoing for a lot of times, because organized crime is quite hard opponent, but it can be managed. And as you mentioned, there are ongoing cooperation within the region and even with outside help. So I think it's a big way or a useful and proper way to tackle this problem.
As a sort of a final thought, if you don't take drugs, there is no demand, there will be no organized crime making business of transporting narcotics.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Árpád, for coming to my podcast again. It was wonderful to hear you to speak about a totally different topic. I love that we have this sort of discussion on economics, on politics, on history, and I really wonder what we're gonna bring up next, because there will be a next time.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our next discussion.
Thank you very much. So see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.